Hi, I'm Nick Haig, and welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast. Jenni Romaniuk is Research Professor and International Director of the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute at the University of South Australia. Her specialism covers branding, loyalty, and growth, and she's developed various different models and metrics that are used by some of the largest companies in the world to assess their brand's distinctive assets and measure mental availability. She's written 3 books that no marketeer should be without that include Better Brand Health, Building Distinctive Assets, and How Brands Grow Part 2 in conjunction with Byron Sharp. Jenni's one of the most influential marketing scientists of our time, so over the next hour, get ready to be taken on a journey of evidence-based marketing and insights. And as always, if you like what you hear, then please do follow and subscribe wherever you listen, as it really does make a difference to getting our podcast found. Welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast, Jenni.
Thank you.
Well, firstly, it's great to be speaking with you again, as I last spoke with you on my previous podcast, which was back in 2021. So doesn't time fly when you're having fun? I'm sure a lot of our listeners know who you are, but for those that don't, could you tell our listeners about the journey you've been on, along with some background on your place of work, the fabulous Ehrenberg-Bass Institute?
Yeah, so I am a research professor at what is currently the University of South Australia, soon to become Adelaide University. We're actually going through the largest ever university merger ever in the history of universities next year. So it's, the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Well, all of you have gone through a merger. I think you know exactly what that means.
I do.
And I've been actually a weird fun fact. I have been at the University of South Australia from first year undergraduate and made it all the way through to professor, which is the highest ranking you can get academically. So how's that for employee loyalty along the way?
I bet you're one of a kind there at the Institute.
No, there's a few. I mean, academia is known for people staying around, but even I was surprised when I realised, oh my God. I mean, I did go backpacking and did a few things in between. I haven't just worked here, but this has been my main employer. But to go through that progression was a bit of a surprise. It wasn't intentional, shall we put it that way. It was more accidental. And I work at the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute. My specialist areas are in branding, essentially. I sort of broadly cover 2 main areas: how the stuff in people's heads influences the choices we make, and how our marketing activity influences the stuff in people's heads. So I spend a lot of time thinking about what's going on in other people's heads, and sometimes my own. And the Institute, we're an R&D centre devoted to marketing science. We're the world's largest. There's about 70-odd researchers doing research in different areas of marketing. And that kind of makes us unique. So a lot of research centres focus on a very small part of marketing. It might be a specific industry or advertising only or media only, whereas we do it all. We span a wide range of categories, countries, as well as different areas of marketing, which makes for some really good, strong debate, because it means that, if I say something about mental availability, which is one of my specialist areas, John Dawes, whose specialist area is pricing, if it doesn't tee up with what he knows about pricing, he goes, hey, wait a sec, no, that can't be right. And so we've got to sort it out. So we have those same debates just as much as marketers who are trying to decide between, should I spend money on advertising or should I have a price promotion? Well, we've already had those sorts of debates internally, because John knows what a price promotion will do. I can talk about what advertising will do. And then we have to reconcile, well, where would you spend your money if you had to?
Yeah. Well, what I love about the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, marketing's a relatively young science, I suppose, borrowing from psychology, economics, other fields of research. But what you and your colleagues do at the Institute, you've opened our eyes and shown us the hard facts from the data. So it's no longer this fluffy anecdotal evidence. It's spouted by marketing managers. You've really empowered the world, these marketing managers, with those internal discussions that you've then, put out there to the world in white papers and books as well. So no, it is. We need to thank you for all the work that you've done there at the Institute.
Oh, you're very kind.
You co-authored How Brands Grow Part 2 with Byron Sharp and followed this up with subsequent research with LinkedIn and the B2B Institute team to show that the laws of growth held true in B2B markets as well as B2C markets. And I think the laws of growth are fascinating insights and extremely important to start with today's conversation. So I know there's a few, but I'd particularly like to talk about double jeopardy and the duplicate purchase law. Can you talk our listeners through each one of those and why they're so crucial to know when trying to grow a brand?
Yeah, well, I think the laws themselves are less important than the questions that underpin them. So double jeopardy actually came from asking the question, if my brand grows, how much is going to come from the customers I've already got versus the ones that I don't have but could get? Now, that's really where double jeopardy came about. And what double jeopardy tells us is that, well, if you grow, your sales will come from both, but proportionately more will come from the new customers you haven't yet got, and only a relatively small amount from the customers you've already got.
Yeah.
And so that's really the double jeopardy pattern is underpinned by the question you first ask. Now, double jeopardy in itself basically says that if you're a small brand, you suffer twice. You have many few users, and those users are slightly less loyal. And what that tells us is that it gives us a benchmark for what is normal for a small brand. And that stops us making mistakes. Because it's easy if you're a small brand to think you should have the loyalty for a big brand, because you can probably do objective testing and go, well, I'm just as good as them. And if the world doesn't see it, maybe there's something wrong with me. No, it's actually just a byproduct of the type of customers that small brands attract. Small brands attract heavy category buyers. Heavy category buyers use both the big brands and the small brands. So when they're voting with their dollars, split it. But if you don't use a category very often, you're typically buying the big brands. So you don't split your vote. You go only to the big brand.
Yeah.
It's unusual for small brands to attract light category buyers. So that's why we get the double jeopardy pattern. It's just a manifestation of how customer bases are distributed. But the question that double jeopardy answers is, do I need to acquire customers to grow? And the answer is yes. In fact, you can't grow without acquiring customers. Even if you grow in loyalty a little bit, you either won't sustain it or you will have grown in penetration a lot to match that little thing.
Yeah.
Then the duplication of purchase law answers a different question. It says, okay, well, if I've got to go out and get new customers, where are they going to come from? Are they going to come from other brands that look like me? Are they going to come from the growing brands? Are they going to come from any other characteristics? And the answer is they're going to come from every brand in the market, but more from the big brands and less from the small brands. So that means if you're going to grow, your acquisition efforts have to go out to everybody. You can't just say, well, I'm going to go after that brand's customers and expect that's going to be it. That's all you need to do. You'll get your magic number from them. It will actually come from everybody. So those two laws are really important because of the questions they answer and then the strategic implications they have about how you allocate resources. So people often get caught up in the maths and the numbers. The numbers are actually, they're fun. I love them. But that's actually not the important part. The important part is the question they answer and the strategy decisions that you make as a consequence of them.
Yeah, and we'll come on to this because I've got a few questions about when we brand track or looking to measure brand health. But equally, those two laws do dictate the type of questions you should be building into your questionnaire as well, don't they?
Well, they in fact how you look at the market. So, for example, the idea of looking at it as a market in itself, rather than through how you want to see in your little part of it, not biasing it and going, I should have a tracker that suits any brand in the market, because that's how I make sure I've got an unbiased read, and I'm
Yeah.
not skewing it through my own lens.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's feel well, especially with double jeopardy. It feels like, brands obviously with lower market shares, they struggle both acquiring customers and retaining existing ones. This double disadvantage they have, and it feels like everything's stacked up against small brands. What is there anything that small brands can actually do to try and grow it, or counter this dominance of big brands?
Be smarter, and use your resources better. I mean, one of the things to do is to use your resources to look like a bigger brand than
Hmm.
you are. And you do that by doing things like reaching out to more people, having more high profile activities and things. I mean, it was interesting when I got this question often in distinctive assets, because when we present distinctive assets and we do it around the world, we use big names, because then you don't have to keep changing them for every single market that you're in. Because
Yeah.
if I use like a local Adelaide brand like RAA in Europe, they'll be like, what's an RAA?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to them. Whereas if I use, a brand like Coca-Cola, they know that. So that's often led people to go, all your examples of big brands, does that mean, big brands are better at building assets? And actually the answer is often not, because even though big brands should have a big advantage, they often squander it, because they have lots of people who have their finger in the pie, changing things, launching things, leading to inconsistencies. And I've seen examples of small brands that have had more discipline, that have stronger distinctive assets than big brands do in the same market.
Yeah.
So it's not always that big brands have an advantage. They should have more of an advantage than they do. And small brands can capitalize right now by being smarter.
Yeah. In my lifetime, never before has a book shaken the marketing world like How Brands Grow. And prior to this, marketers, they might have talked about growing a brand through increased customer loyalty, hyper targeting, but this book blew those theories out of the water. Can you give a quick overview of the book and the fundamentals of being easy to mind and easy to find?
Mm. Well, I mean, I think the book was revolutionary because it said that no longer is it anything goes marketing. Because prior to How Brands Grow, there was kind of this impression that you got to choose how your brands grow, and your the key determinant of your success was how good you were as a marketer.
Yeah.
So if you had a strategy and it didn't work, you were just not very good. And you can blame other things, but that was your fault. But actually, what we know is that no, it's kind of like saying if you're going to build a house, I'm going to tell you, you can't build it out of fairy floss or watermelon. But I can give you some materials that will work and will give you stronger foundations. It's the same thing. I can tell you there are things that will not grow your brand. They have no evidence that they have.
Yeah.
But now we've got stronger foundations about what you can use to grow your brand. And that doesn't mean every brand's going to look the same. Just like every house doesn't look the same, every bridge doesn't look the same, even though they have to conform to the same laws of physics. That's
Yeah.
where we are with marketing now, and so I think it's actually a really exciting time, because now the rest of the C-suite can start taking us seriously, because we're no
Absolutely.
longer fluffy and trying to build brands out of fairy floss.
Yeah.
No disrespect to fairy floss. I love fairy floss.
So yeah, so it's about mental availability and physical availability. Can you
Oh,
just
that's right.
talk?
That's where I was supposed to get to, wasn't I? Gee whiz, thanks for that. Yes. So how do we build brands? And that's the work that's continued on from How Brands Grow, and that is that this idea of mental and physical availability. Mental availability is about being easily thought of in buying situations, and physical availability is about being easy to find and buy. So if you think about it, mental availability is about getting the brain ready to give your brand a mental advantage, give your brand a chance and hopefully a mental advantage. And then physical availability is making sure that the environment is primed, that it's easy to act on that in
Yeah.
order of your brand.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those are
Yeah.
the two key big levers that we see are just really important for growth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think when I first read it, it was like because customer customer loyalty and customer experience is a topic of mine as well as branding, and it was so brands don't grow by increasing customer loyalty; it's about acquiring new customers, and
Oh no, no, it was not. That's not strictly true. There is a bit of loyalty involved because, like, fortunately, anything you do that goes out to customers that don't currently buy you typically also hits the ones that do buy you and has an effect on them as well. But the
yes,
reverse is not the case. And this is where, when people went into loyalty programs where you only send communication to the people who are your current customers, that's where it started to become more of a problem. But yeah, no, if you grow, you will see increases in loyalty as well as increases in penetration. It's just the penetration will be the key thing that you will see in there.
yeah. Well, relating to that, then on each of my podcasts, my previous guest poses a question to the next guest, and related to building this mental availability and building fame. Greg Hahn, co-founder and CCO of Mischief, asks, "It's the oldest argument in advertising that a lot of money is wasted no matter what channel you use. How valuable do you think it is for brands to be famous beyond their niche markets, and especially with B2B or business to business brands?"
Well, yeah, I'm not sure what he means by niche markets, to be honest, because it depends on if you define niche as my subset of who am I imagined marketing within the bigger category buyer market. So any market is a subset of a bigger market.
Yeah,
And so, thinking about where your company is going into the future and in terms of growth, we find that at some point, some brands saturate a subcategory whereby they're the dominant player, and to grow, they either have to grow the subcategory or move to a different subcategory and extend through. So, what is the advantage of being known outside of your? So, I'm going to replace niche with subcategory
yeah,
and do that. Is that it in terms of your long term potential? If you get to the point where you saturate your market, you've already done the groundwork for the future. And it's easy to get locked into next quarter's sales when actually we should be thinking longer term than that.
yeah. Yeah, and maybe I don't know, but maybe Greg was thinking niche being from a smaller B2B category as opposed to broader B2C.
But even that's the same. So you think
Yeah,
about, if you're a B2B category and your category is coffee, so you're supplying coffee machines, filters, beans for offices and things like that. Then you go, okay, well, I'm only dealing with people who have coffee. Well, what about someone who could move into tea? Well, that might open up other businesses, or you might move into cold drinks, which move into, or kids drinks, or this whole heap of things you could move into. Um, but the probably the key thing I'd say in the short term, and this is where people often get a bit messed up. Sometimes the cost of narrowing your audience is higher
mm,
than the loss, than the wastage. It's like there's an error, but the cost of correcting it isn't worth it.
yeah,
And so you get that advantage. And this used to be before we had really claims of sort of hyper targeting back in the old days where there was, broadcast television and things like that. I remember talking to people, marketers who said, basically, we imagine we sell to these types of customers, but actually we sell to everybody. We advertise on this channel because we think it reaches these types of customers, but actually it reaches everybody. And that wastage on both sides is what's been keeping us in business all these years.
yeah,
So
yeah,
so that's the question: is it worth correcting for them? Is it worth excluding the people that you need to do? Sometimes it's easy if it's a geographical issue, then that can be easier. But having said that, if you look at somewhere particularly like the US, buying regional media can be more expensive than buying national media, and so sometimes excluding 5 states that you don't distribute in is not worth it. So
yeah,
that's where the conversation has to come into it as well. It's not so much what's the benefit of it, but what's the cost of not building that.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why continuously advertising works. Is you're building your refreshing memory structures in the minds of buyers who may not be purchasing or may not purchase for several years, but these small nudges do all add up to a big sales effect in if
Yeah, but when you're doing continuous advertising, though, you should be aiming for cumulative reach. And this is
right.
where unduplicated reach is really valuable in that. So it's
Okay.
not just about the same media schedule all the way through. You should be actively going, okay, so if I reach this many people with this particular activity, what's the next one I can have that reaches as more unduplicated people than the same people? And you try to do that. And when you can't do that because the avenues aren't there, you stop and then you spend in the next week and do that. So it's not just about continuous, it's about continuous with reach in mind, cumulative reach, so that each week, each quarter, each month, each quarter, each 6 months, each year, you're reaching more and more people.
Yeah. Yeah. So based on what we've just talked about, if we're going to win in our respective marketplaces or categories, we need to have a well-known brand, strong brand associations so that people think of our brand exclusively over the competitors' brands when they're in a buying situation. You've written a book called
I
Building.
question that one too. But it's okay to have people will think of multiple brands, and you can't tell people what not to think. Our biggest challenge is not excluding others; it's just getting our own brand in there. Because
Yeah,
if our brand's in there, then we've got a chance of actually it being bought. But if it's not in there, the chance of it's not zero, because sometimes we do see something on shelf or see something online that makes us go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Or someone comes in and goes, oh, you're looking for concrete suppliers. Hey, I know Joe. He's really good. You should talk to him, type of thing.
yeah,
Those things happen, but you don't want to necessarily rely on happenstance for your marketing budget. Some of that will happen, but the more you can organize it, the better. So it's less about trying to beat competitors as to trying to beat getting into people's brains in the first place. You
yeah.
do that enough and often enough and keep that memory fresh, competitors will fade away. But yeah, we have to. I always push back on this idea of the only time exclusivity is important is for distinctive assets. If you have a
Yeah.
distinctive asset, you really want to own that and you really don't want it to evoke competitors. That's dangerous. But when it
Well,
comes
no,
to other things, yeah.
and that's where I was going actually, because your book, Building Distinctive Brand Assets, it's well, I think starting point around that is what does distinctiveness mean in the context of brand building, and why is it important for brands to be distinctive?
Um, because often the things brands need to say are things other brands could say, but by saying it looking like them means it goes to the right part of people's brains. So, that's where distinctiveness is really important. It's about making it so easy for people that they don't even have to think about the brand. Because as soon as people have to think of, oh, I wonder who this is from, you've lost them. Because most people don't do that. They're normal.
Yeah. So what are some of the metrics that are most useful for measuring distinctiveness?
Well, the metrics we use, I developed, are based on what we want the asset to do. So, what we want the asset to do is we want it to evoke the brand when the brand is either not present or not noticed. So, it might be there, but maybe we don't register the word or we just see it out of the corner of our eye, etc. And we also want it to only evoke the brand and not do competitors. So that leads to two metrics: fame, which is about how many category buyers, when they're exposed to the asset in an unbranded form, are able to, it triggers the brand,
Okay.
and uniqueness, which is are we alone or do we share it with competitors? And both of them we want to be up to 100% as close as possible, because that tells us there's basically a proxy replacement for the brand.
Okay. You talk about uniqueness there, and I suppose that always leads on to this argument between differentiation and
Mhm.
distinctiveness. And I know there's been a lot said in this debate, especially by the likes of Mark Ritson, who argues that relative differentiation in conjunction with distinctiveness gives the best of both worlds. What's your take on this argument? Does differentiation not play a part in the Ehrenberg-Bass marketing
No,
universe?
no, and it's never. It's a bit of a straw man argument to say that we don't believe in differentiation. Of course we do. It just doesn't happen very often, and it's not necessary for someone to buy. If you're a pharmaceutical company, you live by differentiation. It's called a patent. That's differentiation. That says you're the only people able to manufacture that specific drug in this specific way. And that protects you and gets you lots of money. How do we, that's why pharmaceutical companies are worth so much, by the quality of their patents. So no, there is differentiation that happens all the time. But most people buy most brands without needing to. They don't see the brands they buy as different, and they don't need to. And we see this empirically in different forms. Because I'd heard this for ages, and I went, I don't understand the evidence behind it. And the interesting thing was that if differentiation existed, those laws we talked about in the first instance wouldn't. We wouldn't see the duplication of purchase law if differentiation existed, because what it would see is that brands were competing in silos, because you would find the soft drink brand that was just right for you, and I would find the one that was just right for you. Or you would find the car brand that was perfect for you. I would find the car brand that's perfect for me. And we wouldn't even think about each other's cars because we are different customers. So that was the first thing that makes you go, wait a sec, it doesn't make sense in normal markets. Then you have the fact that when you ask people about them seeing brands as different from others, they tend to give quite low scores on that. We've done that. We've used other people's data as well as our own to find that. An element of differentiation that's kind of been wiped away now, like it didn't exist, which I think is a little bit naughty to pretend this does exist. But the idea of differentiation was that you are either better or different than other brands. You offer something unique, or that's superior to what other brands offer. And when we've tested for uniqueness, people don't have unique associations linked to brands. For associations that matter, they either have multiple brands linked to them or no brands linked to them in the marketplace. Because for each of us as individuals, we have some context we are involved in a lot, and some we hardly have any involvement at all. So, for example, do you have kids?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking about drinks again and category entry points about beverages and kids, you probably have lots of brands that you would link to that. I don't have kids. I have very few, or none in some cases, because it's not something my brain has ever had to process. So that's the situation. That's the individual relationship there. But in general, we're either like you with lots, or like me with none.
Yeah.
Very few people just have one brand. So all of the pieces of the puzzle that would lead to differentiation being important for everyday purchasing, they don't paint that picture. Does that mean you should strive to be different? Which is the argument that next comes forward. I love the fact I have to keep arguing with myself with this, because people don't seem to. We don't have many forums where people can have a good discussion on these things. But the problem with striving to be different is we were sold a bit of a lie that you can just advertise that you've got something special and people will believe you. People are not that stupid. They don't, but that's why we have in most advertising legislation and an exception for puffery. So when the pizza store down King William Street in Adelaide says it's the world's greatest pizza, no one seriously believes they have assessed themselves against every other pizza in the entire world and come out at number one.
Yeah.
But that's okay. They don't have to, because the law knows, and we know that it's puffery. They're using it to thing, and so they don't have to be really superior. And so that's the difference between sort of claiming you're superior and expecting that people really believe that and buy it because of that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm still unconvinced by the evidence that people put forward for differentiation. I've asked people to keep sending it to me. If you do have any, if any reviewers listeners have any, please. I'm a scientist. I will change my mind if the evidence says so, but all the evidence I've seen has said that we want categories to evolve, not to make brands different, but to innovate and to improve our mental and physical availability. And so innovation is important, not for differentiation, but to help us get more thought about and get more distribution and more presence in the marketplace. And that's how we can use innovation better, rather than thinking we're doing it because we're trying to get to be different than other brands.
B2B Frameworks is a curated collection of proven business frameworks to develop your strategic thinking skills, solve your biggest business problems, and unlock your next promotion. Our mission is to help you achieve these goals. We want to create the next generation of successful business leaders by providing the tools and frameworks needed to create effective strategies that drive business growth. Each framework comes with a downloadable set of instructions with large, colourful diagrams and editable templates to guide you through the process step by step and prompt you to consider the problem from every possible angle. Along with audio guides and educational tools, our extensive content library is full of real-world examples and case studies of strategic thinking in action. So why learn with B2B Frameworks? We've carefully curated only the most effective, proven business and marketing frameworks. Our downloadable materials and audio guides will help you easily apply each framework. And the insights and advice you'll find across the site are based on 30 years of consulting experience from one of the world's leading business strategy experts, Paul Haig. B2B Frameworks is a small investment to advance your career or grow your business. Start your journey to becoming a successful business leader by joining B2B Frameworks today. Do you think, Jenny, differentiation, the phase comes in during the brand positioning, positioning, what customers want, how you can deliver against that, and then the distinctiveness phase comes after in the look and feel, whether it's packaging, website, campaigns?
Yeah, no, because I think positioning again, when people say positioning, I think they forget that it's an empirical phenomena. So you can see if a brand's positioned because when we have attributes and brands, this is something I talk about in Better Brand Health and show how it can be done. But when you have attributes and brands, it's not a random check of brands and attributes. There's actually underlying patterns that underpin that. One is brand size and the other is the degree to which the attribute is prototypical of the category. And once you know those two, once you have those two bits of information, you can do a simple mathematical calculation to work out what the expected value for any brand on any attribute is. And once you know that, you can work out whether or not a brand scores higher or lower or normal for an attribute. And when a brand scores higher than it should, that is essentially what positioning is. And that comes from either a functional part of your product portfolio. So say you serve a part of the market that not everyone else does and you're recognized as doing that, or your advertising messaging cutting through and the attribute represents a quality that you've advertised. So, this is the old Volvo and safety aspect of it, that they advertised that and it came through. So they score higher than they should on safety. Because of the advertising. So that's where you've got those things coming through and positioning. Now, so we can see that, but the question is, should you keep doing that same attribute over and over again to strengthen that one position? Is that the path to success? We've done some empirical testing of this with category entry points across we did a whole heap of studies, so it's between 60 and 100 categories and included B2B as well as all services, durables, packaged goods. And we just asked a couple of simple questions like, to what extent did the top brand or the top three brands were strongly positioned in one attribute? And we defined strong positioning empirically as scoring 20 percentage points higher than it should for a brand of its size on an attribute of that size. And what we found is that only 15% of brands in the top 3 were strongly positioned on any attribute, let alone just one.
Right.
What the rest, most of it was actually small brands with functional differences were the ones that scored a lot. There are a few exceptions, but they're few and far between. What we did find was a steady pattern is that bigger brands tended to have more positions or what we call mental advantages than smaller brands. And what that shows is that they've accumulated advertising that has stuck in people's brains and kept those mental advantages over a long period of time. Because you can't build multiple mental advantages quickly. It takes time to do that. You have to have advertising that's very clear messaging, well branded, and you've got that. There was no evidence that big brands succeed by narrowcasting only one attribute. So that tells me that you want to get a mental advantage, but you can go too far.
Yeah. Yeah. You've just mentioned category entry points there, and some of the groundbreaking research that you've done is around that. So it's category entry points are important. Can you talk to our listeners about what they are and maybe some examples of category entry points in a B2B environment?
Sure. So category entry points are the thoughts that people have before they've thought of what brands to buy. So they're the mental highways that people go down to shortcut options that are suitable for that situation. So they're the contexts that define what is retrieved from memory. And they are, I use the framework of the W's to show the breadth of category entry points, because most people, when they see category entry points, go, "Oh, these are familiar," but usually they've worked with one part of them, not them in total. So the full range of the W's are that you cover when, which is timing issues, where, which is location issues, a location aspects of it. That can be physical location, can be digital locations. While covers other activities that are done either in conjunction or instead of, or not done because something else is done. With or instead of what, that covers other categories that might be co-consumed or replaced by the particular thing. With or for whom captures the effect of other people. How feeling captures the effect of emotions. That can be before, during, or after engaging with the category. And why, which covers benefits and motives coming through. And in a B2B context, those still 7 still apply, but there are a few variations in there. For example, the for whom has 2 aspects to it, because each B2B decision maker is both a person and an employee.
Yeah.
So they have the business in mind, but they also have their own career aspirations and personal issues and things in mind. So you need to, when you're talking about category entry points in a B2B context, be cognizant of both. So, for example, on a business side, a business that is, currently in the US, they're talking about tariffs. A business that is just about to go, one of those ones that's about to face a whole heap of tariffs, different mindset from one that maybe hasn't had to deal with that issue. Or a business that's poised, that's planning for growth, might be different from one that's in a mature market and is thinking of contraction.
Yeah.
Similarly, a person who is new to an organisation might have different lens on. So they might be more risk averse because they don't want to screw up, or they might be like, here's my chance to make a mark. So they might be thinking of things that are a little bit outside the box. Similarly, someone who's going for promotion might be a different mindset in there. So all of those W's apply, but they just apply in different, you have to have those 2 lenses that you judge them through.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're just really about all of the different sorts of things that people have, the thoughts that people have as they're coming into a need that means your business could be one of the one of the businesses they want to approach.
Yeah. Well, I think we could build a whole podcast just around talking about category entry points, don't we? And I know you've written a paper on this specifically about category entry points in a B2B world. So we can put a link in the notes of the podcast for people to dig deeper on that subject too. Before I left the agency I'd set up last year, I'd spent a career as a market researcher working for some of the largest brands in the world. Majority of these projects were either CX or brand health trackers. And I was delighted when you published your third book, Better Brand Health. Firstly, what led you to want to write such a book in the first instance?
Masochism. No, I'm joking. No, I did have people go, "Why are you writing this? No one's really going to. Who's going to want to read this? A few, like 1,000 people. That's it. Will be interested in this." And I'm like, "Oh no. Well, first of all, I think there's a bigger market than that, and secondly, just really needed to because we've done so much research in different parts of it." Because I had managed brand trackers and have been really unsatisfied with my level of knowledge to be able to answer questions. And I don't like being in that sort of situation. I'm fortunate enough I'm in a job where I can find answers to questions. So over about a decade, I had different research degree students look at different parts of the brand health tracker. And then just, at the end of it went, I really have to pull this together because I was finding I was having different conversations with people. Because if people asked me questions, there was plenty I could talk about, but I realized that unless they read like 6 or 7 PhDs and masters by research thesis, they weren't going to get it, which, no disrespect to my ex-students, you're all fabulous, but no one's going to do that. And so, just wanted to really sit down and put it together. But the big challenge was I wanted to make it something that both dealt with the strategy of it, of why are we doing this, and the big picture of what we're trying to achieve with it, but at the same time have people appreciate that sometimes what seem like inconsequential decisions can actually have a big difference on the quality of data that we have. Because I think sometimes, they will say don't sweat the small stuff. Actually, sometimes you do have to sweat the small stuff because that can change how you look at the world. But you have to know what small stuff to sweat. And so that's what I really wanted to get in there as well, is that sometimes words matter when you're constructing an attribute. And if you don't get that right, you're not going to get the quality of information afterwards.
Yeah, well, I fully back that. And like you say, anyone can design a questionnaire, but you only get out what you put in. And if you put in the wrong questions in or looking to measure the wrong things, then your results at the back end of the tracker are definitely going to be lacking in some respect. And so in terms of that, after reading your book, us as an agency, we changed a number of things as a result, including emphasizing to clients that instead of the key brand awareness that sometimes they were tracking was top of mind, instead it was the percentage of non-buyers that were aware of the brand. What are the common errors that agencies and clients alike often make when designing brand trackers, or to put it another way, what should we include in our brand trackers when designing them?
Well, I think, the common mistakes people make are, one of the things that my little pet peeve of mine is making everything an attribute. So just because you can phrase as an attribute doesn't mean it is. I will confess, actually, academia does the opposite. They make everything a scale.
Yeah.
So I've seen questions in academic surveys where people go, "Are you aware of this brand?" Strongly agree to strongly disagree. I'm like, how do you slightly disagree that I'm aware of this brand? That makes no sense to me. It doesn't, sort of thing. So, but in industry, that in the interest of brevity, they go, "Oh, well, let's just put in a brand I've heard a lot about." I don't even know what that means. I don't even know how you would action it. I don't even know how the responses would be. So that's one thing, is that just because it can be an attribute doesn't mean it is. Attributes are qualities that are associated with brands. If they're relativities and depend on other factors, they're no use of attribute. They're no use as attributes. When I want something different, that's fine. Yes, people do genuinely want something different, but how do you action that? Because what is different is preconditioned on you knowing what they just had. And unless you've asked them what they've just had, you don't know what different means to them. So therefore, it's just not actionable.
Yeah.
And physical availability stuff being measured as attributes too. I find that a bit lazy and a bit not really thinking about that physical availability is not experience. It's not through the lens of the consumer. It's through the environment. And so it's more about what you do than what consumers see you do.
Yeah.
For example, one of the most common attributes people will do is has a wide range of products.
Yeah.
Do you know a consumer that cares if you have a wide range of products or not, or a business buyer? No, they want you to have the products they want. That's it. They don't care about all the ones that they don't buy that you have. So, where would someone get a sense of a wide range of products? How would you change that? And how would you use that information? It just, if you play it out of how would this be useful, you realize it's just not. And we're just putting too many of those things into our questionnaires and, giving ourselves the illusion of knowledge, but not anything value of any value.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do want to see one thing is that trying to get the bias out of it, the bias out of the sample, the bias out of brand lists, the bias out of the attributes, getting that so that it's a true category read, designed for the category, analyze for the buyer, report for the brand. That's the mantra that I really want people to take away from this. Design for the category, because you never know where your brand's going to be in the future. If you're a big brand, you might launch a small brand. You might acquire a small brand. And so you need to look through a small brand lens. You don't want to have a whole new tracker for that. Analyze for the buyer, because that's the biggest difference between response and non-response. It's not your age, it's not your gender, it's not whether you're on TikTok, it's whether you've bought the brand in the past or not. And report for the brand, because metrics are affected by size and the expectations for a big brand should be different than that for a small brand. What you get shouldn't matter. It should matter is if it's good, high, low, or what you should get for your size. And size should always put a context around what you're measuring. And that's really what I want people to improve in the quality of the data they're getting. Because the better data everyone has, the better decisions people make. And again, the more serious marketing is taken.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, I think market research is often seen as an art as much as it is a science. But I think what your book does and shows is that this empirical evidence guides us to see it as a lot more scientific than otherwise assumed. And so, using some of these principles to build into your brand tracker really does help when reporting it out at the other end. So it's a fabulous book.
Thank you.
Brand tracking is crucial for brands, but it's about creating this feedback loop, reflecting on your marketing efforts. Are they working or not? But it is expensive and it is definitely time consuming. You know the guys at Evidenza well, having worked alongside them when they were at LinkedIn, and I spoke to Peter Weinberg and John Lombardo previously on this podcast about their synthetic data and the advantageous speed and cost of which results can be generated with. And I'm curious, you do a lot of research, Jenni, at the Institute and yourself as well. Have you ever used synthetic data for any of the research you carried out?
No, no. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about it to judge. And while I understand people's concerns about panels and professional panel makers and things like that. I get that, but what I do know is I know what data should look like. And so when I get it from a survey that's done with a panel, if it was dodgy, I'd be able to pick it because I know all the patterns that underpin it. And it would take a very smart AI machine to be able to do that. My concern with synthetic data is how do you know when it's wrong?
Yeah.
If you have nothing to compare it to, how do you know when it's wrong? So
Well, I suppose
I
the
don't.
thing could be you maybe could use it for one of your brand trackers and see if it relates. But yeah, I'm with
But
you on
that's the
that.
thing is if it's different, is it wrong or not? Or is it better? I mean, the thing about it is I don't know enough. I don't know enough to judge it. So I'm not dismissing it out of hand because I do agree. But what I will say is a lot of the cost of trackers people put on themselves, you should not do continuous brand tracking. It's a waste of money. Things
Yeah.
don't change that quickly. most of the time you can get away with most brands in most categories could get away with once or twice a year. And in that case, you can do a decent sample and get a good read on that. The reasons people were doing continuous trackers, well, I mean, they all started back when we had field teams. And so you would have a field team and you want to give them continuous work. And one of the best ways to give them continuous work was because if you talk to most field operators, they would always have a core of, say 10 to 20 interviewers who are really good. And then you'd have the transients that come in and out like you do in any sort of part-time job. And so, getting a brand health tracker where you had to get like 100 interviews a week or something like that was a great way to reward the core and keep them with you. And doing that. But of course, there's a limit on when you're calling people or knocking on people's doors because, it actually predates that. There's a limit on how much a single person can call or door knock in terms of response rates. So that's why they couldn't say, well, let's collect 1,000 people in a week, because they couldn't do it. It just physically didn't. No one had the human power to do it. But now we can. We don't have to get that dribble of data every week. And the more you get that dribble of data, the more error you've got prone coming in there. And the harder it is, the more noise you're creating. So I do think some of the things that cost us money, if we cut out the crap questions, cut down the frequency to when we've got given the things we do, realistic chance to actually affect the market, we'd actually save a lot of money just on that aspect of it. And then we can maybe have some money to experiment with things like synthetic data and see what it can do and what it can't do. Because I'm sure, like most new innovations, there's some things it's going to be really good at, some things it's not. So, I think there's a role for finding those sorts of innovations and seeing what's going on and playing around with them. But I think we can still do a lot more with the traditional work that we're doing and improve the quality of that.
Well, I think some good points there, especially around question length as well, because sometimes, you do need a strong agency to push back. There's this tendency to put everything in the kitchen sink in a brand tracker, especially, and they can definitely mushroom in size. So,
or not, and not take things out. That's the thing, is people are afraid to take things out because they don't quite know what the magic measures are. And so, so they end up really bloated because of that.
Well, now they do, because they can read better brand health and they know what to put in.
I hope so. I'm hoping that people, at least, and this is where on my website, I actually put a template questionnaire. So if someone did want to start from scratch, they can take that, fill in the things that I think are essential, and then decide, well, what else do we add that maybe is important for our organisation? Because Greg in accounting likes that metric, and Sally, who's the CMO, thinks that's fabulous. Whatever, it's always going to be that. But at least you strip it down to the essentials first, and then only add what you need to, which is less painful than cutting, because people don't like to cut stuff.
Yeah, they definitely don't. This podcast is sponsored by B2B Frameworks, and we've talked about some of the frameworks you've developed today, including distinctive assets and category entry points. Do you have a favourite business or marketing framework that we haven't talked about today, Jenni?
One of my favourite ones, which I think is underplayed and not thought about enough, is when we look at models of how advertising work. Andrew Ehrenberg had a very simple one, which is what he called his ATR model. So it was a pushback. So at the time, and still now, this idea of the AIDA model: awareness, interest, desire, action, that you have to get people pumped up, ready to go, and then they will run out and buy your brand and sort of stuff. Whereas Andrew just went, well, actually, I think it's just you let people know it's around. I would change the A to M, because I would say mental availability, because I don't think it's just letting people know it's in the category. I think it's about letting people know why, what the context when it's useful to buy it.
Yeah.
That's often enough to get people to try it. And if they try it and it works and a little bit of reinforcement, they will repeat. And so I think sometimes we overcomplicate our models of how advertising works. And the ATR model is one of the most elegant, simple ways of describing the vast majority of behaviour that happens out there.
Well, to conclude, Jenny, I'd like to finish on my quick fire questions. So, firstly, a couple of questions from the listeners. Alejandro Murillo from Mexico. He asks, one thing I'm dying to know is what Jenny thinks of traditional tactics in B2B marketing, like trade shows, white paper content, webinars. These tactics are sometimes expensive, but are they a waste of money? Would producing a great ad and just go for reach and impressions be better?
Depends. Because I think some of those trade shows and things like that, yes, they're expensive, but the question I would have is, do they get you unduplicated reach? Do they reach people you would not reach through other mechanisms? And if that's the case, then it's a question of how much and what's the cost of not being there.
Yeah,
So sometimes you do need to have some might be lower, but they just reach decision makers you would not get through any other forum.
yeah,
But having said that, I will say there's often better ways to utilize those. So, for example, if you're at a trade show, do you have strong distinctive assets and are you using them? Because that's what makes people, if they go, oh, yeah, that's the blue brand. I remember they were doing something interesting. I was going to see what's going on over there.
yeah,
Or that's the one with the cute cuddly mascot. I should go and see that. Oh, they've got little ones. Great. I'll take one for my kid, type of thing. So this is where harnessing the power of branding in those environments and making sure every touch point utilizes your distinctive assets as much as possible can help you make the most of even those things that are high cost and relatively low reach. But I will say the vast majority of low reach activities probably are reaching people you would have got through other mechanisms. So
yeah.
that's the thing, is it's not just absolute reach, it's unduplicated reach that is really important to make sure you've got going on there.
Yeah. Okay. Secondly, from Randy Ongoko in the Philippines, he asks, what's the impact of fake news or misinformation on brand health?
The answer is very little, because the vast majority of people don't pay much attention to the news and are not really affected by it. So when we find that things, even when real bad things happen to brands, they just don't seem to register very much in terms of people's behaviour. People don't remember it. People don't process it. People don't remember it because a lot of it's not really useful information in the context of buying.
Yeah.
And that's what we got to remember is when people go into the context of buying, that's the lens they're looking through. And yes, there might be other information, but that doesn't actually happen. It doesn't actually factor in. And so you've always got to remember that memory is contextual. What is retrieved is defined by the cues that you use. So if your cues are about what you need in that context, any information that's unrelated to that is unlikely to be retrieved. So all of the different sorts of things that come out there, a lot of them don't actually register. Now, sometimes they get amplified, and sometimes brands themselves do things that magnify their own issues. But often, those sorts of things, when they're long lasting, they're symptomatic of problems that are already there. I mean, there's a lot of discussion right now about Elon Musk and Tesla.
Yeah.
But Tesla was already in trouble long before Elon Musk got involved in the US government because they were not a very good marketing organization. They'd had too long with demand outstripping supply that they didn't build up any marketing muscles. And so
Yeah.
when suddenly marketing became important, they're pretty weak.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's not helping, but he's a symptom on top of a much bigger problem for the company.
What's the best piece of business advice you've ever been given?
Oh, I think probably the best. um, I I don't know. I thought I can't really think of anything offhand because I can think of the things that, like the worst pieces of business advice that I've been given,
Go
and
on then, give us that.
they're usually about when I found something intellectually curious, and I tell somebody, and they're just like, "Huh, what's that?" And they don't see what I see. And what I've learned is that I'm not very good at explaining ideas when I first have them. And so my initial explanations for something I'm excited about just sound like gibberish to normal people. So what I've learned is that I don't. I talk a bit, but I don't take people's reactions seriously. I use it more as a way to unpack and understand my own idea better by having to say it out loud. And the more I have to say it out loud, the better I get at explaining it to myself as well as to other people.
Yeah.
So that's the thing I probably learnt more than anything, which I'm not sure if anyone actually told me this or whether it was just trial and error I got there. But yeah, I've just learnt that I've got to practice before I can actually explain what's going on in my brain to anybody.
Well, you've done a pretty good job over time through reflection to pass that to the wider world. Um, who would you like me to reach out to and invite to come on this podcast in the future?
I was thinking about it, and I don't think you've had it on. I did do a quick check, and I couldn't see it. But Tom Fishburne, because I think the cartoonist, because
Yeah.
he looks at the world through humour, and I just find him a really delightful guy to speak to. And I think his view of how marketing works, because he's looking at it through that humorous lens, is really telling and really insightful.
I think that's a fabulous guest, and I do know Tom's work. So yeah, he'd be a very different guest as well to have on. So I'll reach out to Tom and see if he's
That's what I was
available.
thinking. Who would you not normally think of and sort of
Yeah.
stuff? And yeah, no, he's a lovely man. But just the way he sees the marketing world, I think, is just, he's able to point to things and just the ability to encapsulate. So that's when speaking about me unable to explain things. I think he does the opposite. He's able to take an idea and just in a couple of images convey so much. I'm so jealous of that capability because I just think it's such a powerful skill.
And finally, Jenny, my next guest is Greg Fisher. So he's the professor of entrepreneurship at Indiana University and the author of his most recent book, The Principles of Entrepreneurial Progress. What question would you like to pose to him?
I'm curious, do entrepreneurs do they tend to make more type 1 or type 2 errors?
Okay.
That is,
Yeah.
do they tend to act when they shouldn't or fail to act when they should? What's the more common error that entrepreneurs make that holds them back from success?
Yeah. Excellent question. Well, every time we speak, Jenny, I learn something new. So thank you for joining me on the podcast today. The sun has now gone down in Adelaide, so it's eating into your evening. So just in summary of what we've talked about, although growth is never easy, it's almost always necessary because companies that don't grow, they're either stagnant or shrinking, and your days are numbered if you can't be competitive. And of course, there's extraneous factors such as the economy come into play that need to be accounted for during a growth stage. But the key components for success through growth are in your hands, listeners. You can control the mental shelf or the physical shelf on which customers can find your brand. And now with Jenny's additional books, you have the blueprint to develop your brand's distinctive assets and track your brand health against the competition. Throughout our discussion today, we talked a lot about your books, but also the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute. If anyone is interested in learning more, how should they go about getting in touch?
Yeah, well, we have on our website details there's three ways we work with companies and people. One is through our corporate sponsorship program, where companies sign up and get access to a wealth of knowledge and the 70 odd researchers that I've talked about. We do bespoke research projects for companies when it comes to things like distinctive assets in our areas of specialist expertise. So we measure strength of distinctive assets and advise on that. And we have our new product, which has just come out, which is How Brands Grow Live for Executives, which is a program individuals can come and be part of. So myself and/or Byron are there with the team of researchers. We have one in Singapore coming up soon, and then there's Bordeaux, which coincidentally just happens to be after the World Wine Fair in Bordeaux. So if
Good
you're a bit of a
timing.
wine buff and you want a good excuse to come a few days early to acclimatise, and drink some wine. And then we also have one in Boston in September. So they're great opportunities for people who maybe can't become corporate sponsors because they either don't have the budget in the company or they just feel like the company's too small to do so, but they want to learn more about how brands grow and how it applies to their particular context. We have a lot of fun in those 4-day sessions.
We've already sold the Bordeaux one for me, so I'll.
Oh, look forward to seeing you there, Nick.
That's on my doorstep. I'll have a look at that. Jenny, thank you very much for eating into your evening there. As I say, it's always insightful. Thank you for the books. Thank you for guiding me throughout my branding research career, and appreciate all the time and the insights you've given us today. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
This podcast has been brought to you in partnership with Awards International. Awards International is dedicated to running successful business awards programs and conferences. Founded in 2008 by Don Hales and Neil Skihel, the company's core mission centres on honouring and celebrating exceptional achievements in customer and employee experience, but also in overall business excellence across diverse sectors. In addition, their aim is to showcase best practices, innovations, and achievements that contribute positively to these areas, ultimately inspiring other organisations to improve their own customer experience, employee engagement strategies, and overall business success. To find out more about Awards International and how to register your interest in their awards programs, check their website www.awardsinternational.com.